Sorry for the delay, but welcome everybody to the 2013-2014 Innovation Catalyst Seminar Series. This is our inaugural event, so we're really, really pleased to have everybody here. My name is Maria Emanuel. I'm the Senior Licensing Manager at UNH Innovation, which 2 weeks ago was the ORPC, Office for Research Partnerships and Commercialization. So hopefully we'll all remember our new moniker and help you get it right too. We started this seminar series back in January 2011. And we have covered a number of different topics over the years. We started off talking about foundations related to intellectual property, different types of agreements and contracts, structure and funding options for setting up new companies. Last year, if you attended, we had a theme on innovations in, and we looked at different segments in New Hampshire of different kind of different categories and growth opportunities within them. We brought in a lot of local speakers for that. And so this year our theme is Lean Startup Business Tactics, and each month we're going to tackle a major topic relating to starting and executing your own business. And we're going to use the Lean Startup principles. We've asked local experts to come and provide information to us based on their experiences. So, a few housekeeping things. As always, we hope that you will stay. There's a networking period after this, and there's food and beverage right in that direction. But please help yourself throughout the seminar. Our speakers thought it might be kind of fun to make sure we keep the dialogue going if everybody has a happy belly and happy palate. And I have to mention, even though I think we're all set, but if you are not over 21, you have to avoid the beer. Before I introduce our speakers, I wanted to just to acknowledge this great space that we are having our seminar in for the course of this year. This is a new location for us, and we're here in the Durham offices of the NHICC, which is the New Hampshire Innovation Commercialization Center. And organization, I'm going to read this so I don't mess it up, dedicated to accelerating the development of early stage scalable companies as well as the commercialization of UNH intellectual capital. And right back here, if you don't mind raising your hand, is Mark Kaplan, the CEO of the NHICC. We want to extend our thanks for hosting us. And finally, I'd like to ask my colleagues from UNH Innovation to stand up. So I think we have some new faces, and that way you know who we are and kind of what we do. So if you guys don't mind. I'll start here. We have Gretchen Smith, who's the program manager of the NHIRC, which is the New Hampshire Innovation Research Center. It's a state-funded grant program for New Hampshire businesses to work with academic partners, and Gretchen could tell you more about that during the networking period. Right there in the back, if Paige can wave, Paige is our office manager. And we have Tim Willis and Tristan Carrier, and they are fellow licensing managers. Thank you. And not with us today is a recent addition to our office, Steve Marchand, who is the Director of Corporate Development, and then Mark Saddam, who is our Executive Director, and usually has the honor of kicking off these seminars, but he's co-hosting a conference in Dallas right now. But you will see him next month, same location. Okay, so enough of that. The more important part is I want to talk today and give you an introduction to our speakers in today's topic, which is identifying your minimum viable product. So we're really fortunate to have Josh Scheer and Doug Henderson as our speakers today, and to kick this off. Josh is the founder and owner of AlphaLoft, which is a co-working space in Portsmouth for high-tech entrepreneurs. And Josh is a web application developer, entrepreneur, tech-driven individual. He's been recognized in the software development industry and by Adobe for his expertise in cold fusion. And Doug Henderson is the founder of FrostHub, which is located literally right here, toward the back of the room. Okay, so I'm off by a few feet, but you get the point. It's an enterprise software company that provides professional services firms with tools that improve performance, increase collaboration, and reduce coordination costs. And he has over 25 years of experience with strong client relationships and helping with the launch of new products and services. And I've asked them to augment those introductions as they're giving their presentations, tell them a little bit more about themselves. Both speakers have said it would be great to have comments and questions throughout the course of their presentations, so please feel free to get engaged. And with that, I'll turn it over to Josh. Thank you.
No, thank you. And so before we get started, because this is sort of a kickoff to a whole series for Lean Startup, just raise your hand if you're familiar with Lean Startup as it is, or a little bit familiar. All right, so in a fair number. How many people attended the Lean Startup seminar that Mark had done last series? Only a couple. Okay, so what I'm going to do for this, sort of the plan of attack for today's presentation, is to go over some basic stuff about Lean, sort of get us all up to the same page, and then kind of really focus on some more of the theory on MVP itself and measurement and understanding what we need to measure, what the point of the MVP is supposed to be, and go over all the theory stuff. And then the idea is that Doug is going to jump up and he'll be focusing on real life and practical application for his startup. So we sort of have the theory and then the reality. And again, feel free to chime in and ask questions at any point. And remind me if I end up stepping in front of the projector screen. Let me know. So again, I'm Joshua Sear. So I run AlphaLoft. And all right, how many people here are familiar with AlphaLoft, have heard of AlphaLoft before? Okay, we're doing a good job. So the rest of you are now. That's good. So we do have a lot of folks that not only work in AlphaLoft, we actually do a lot of programming at AlphaLoft as well. A lot of community events. I run a monthly startup meetup. I run numerous tech meetups. And I host a number of others. This event is actually under an umbrella of several other events that are going on simultaneously this week called Seacoast Forward, which is a thing that I was trying to promote because it turns out just so happened a lot of different organizations, ICC, AlphaLoft, Seacoast Local, et cetera, all had planned on doing events this week anyway. And instead of trying to panic about all us competing with the same events, let's just celebrate that there's so much great programming and engaged organizations and individuals here on the Seacoast. And so we created Seacoast Forward, and there's actually another event later tonight, and there's a lunch and learn at AlphaLoft tomorrow that you're all welcome to attend. And that lunch and learn will be with Mitch Bragg from Ascension Law, and it'll be about business formations, entities, LLC versus C Corp versus S Corp, what might be appropriate for you. So that said, let's talk more about Lean Startup. What is Lean Startup? So there's lots of different definitions we could have of a startup or a Lean startup, but really it's about getting from the original hypothesis, the original plan, to the one that's actually going to work. And what is that original plan, that plan A? And it's your leap of faith hypothesis. You have a business model, your core idea is actually a leap of faith, right? We're making a lot of assumptions when we have our idea for our new business, our new product. And what we want to do is, what we need to do is make sure we validate those assumptions right away. We test our hypothesis as quickly as possible and make changes as appropriate. So for some examples of this in the past would, will people be willing to listen to music privately in a public setting? Before we had Walkman, right, before we had iPod, that was a big question mark. Why would you be out in public and then privately listening to music while everybody else is around you, right? Will people be willing to pay for music, right? Before we had iTunes or Google Play or a number of other things, people were using Napster and they were downloading it for free. So it was a big question mark as far as the business line. Share their personal moments with the public, YouTube, or their dating interests, right? How ridiculous would that seem to be showing my profile, what my interests are in a date or something like that? And yet here we are, and it's the most common form for people to find dates, turns out, yeah. So we do that. In order to do that, in order to have an MVP, in order to be lean, we have to do it through a loop. And a common feedback loop looks like this. We have our idea. We make something. In this case, it might be code. So we're building our product. We're then going to measure the result of that. And then we're going to pull data from that measurement. We're going to analyze that. We're going to learn from it. And we're going to go back to idea formation again. And we're going to go around this loop over and over and over and over and over again. And ideally, we do that as fast as possible, as cheap as possible, and we get the best quality data we can out of our MVP, our minimum viable product. And that's what's going to drive us to the quality product that everybody's going to want to buy or use or consume or whatever the scenario is. So my MVP, the idea for a minimum viable product is I'm going to read it right off the screen here, a smallest iteration of that's going to validate assumptions, that's going to prove something out, right? So I have an idea about public video. What can I do to just purify that to its purest form to validate whether people are going to be willing to put video up online and share it with the world, or listen to music in front of the public, or buy my awesome widget, right? Or the dollar a month shaving club, or whatever the idea is that you have, right? What is it that I can do to prove that? And it's not, the first MVP is not always a tactile object. It's not always a physical thing. A quick example of that, one of the members of AlphaLoft has a startup, and he had an idea that people were willing to pay for data about distressed properties. Companies want to know what other companies have distressed properties so they can take action on maybe acquiring that property or doing something with it. Turns out all this data is in the public. And so he had an idea that people were going to be actually willing to pay for this data, so he took a CSV file, a spreadsheet, did a mail merge, saved it as a PDF, and put it up online for $150. And that's all. It was a real quick job, real quick and easy, put some ads on Google AdSense, and people came and they bought the product. He proved very quickly, without building a whole product, without having to build a shopping cart, without having a whole back-end system to automate all kinds of stuff. He had a really quick couple hours project to prove that people are actually willing to pay for free data. And he did that through some cheap advertising. And that was enough validation for him to move forward and keep investigating into this product. So it doesn't have to be a physical object. It could be not even it could be a product that you're not actually going to sell even, right? It could just be a concept that proves the idea. So it is how we test our leap of faith. It's how we know what's working and not. So not only is it the product, but it's also the measurement. It has to be built in. We have to be able to, with our minimum viable product, we have to be able to determine whether it's working or not. We have to take data from that and measure our success or our failure, and we have to do that quickly. So we can't be building our minimum viable product over 6 months and then do testing over 6 months. We're never ever going to get to the answer fast enough to justify the whole process, or we'll run out of money. So we want to iterate often. We want to measure everything we can possibly measure that's worth measuring, and I'll get to that in a minute. And again, we want to fail really quickly, because we're not going to be right the first time. No one ever is, right? And the biggest success stories out there actually started off as completely different businesses. So most of them did. So we want to learn from that and fail quickly. So an example of a minimum viable product, this is actually not Doug, it's probably one of his interns or something, but that's a shot of FrostHub original idea boards and storyboarding, right? So their MVP at that part was just building stuff out physically on paper before you put a lot of time in code and graphic design and other steps. And going through the process and working with potential customers personally, one-on-one, and stepping through that process and making sure that they're not missing anything. So a little thought about short cycles and why do we want to iterate so quickly versus the value of really putting a lot of thought and time into something and focusing on it and then releasing months or longer. An example is stuffing envelopes. And so we all know that it's a lot more efficient, right, to do one step first and then the next step and then the next step, right? So we're going to print them out, we're going to fold all of them, and then we're going to take them over here, we're going to merge them, and then we're going to sit the labels on. We have a whole system, and we can automate it, right, with multiple people. And we know that's more efficient. But the reality is it's actually not. And there's been actually a lot of studies, really clever studies, that show that staging it like that is not necessarily more efficient. And in fact, if there's something goes horribly wrong, your mail merge is wrong, the size of the envelope is wrong, right, all these other issues, you don't find out until you're way down the project, right? And so doing small batches, being able to test, and those short cycles can actually be a real boon. We can perfectly execute, and you can read it on the screen, we can really perfectly execute a really horrible idea. And we could take 2 years doing it. And a lot of products have been released that way, right? We can probably all think of big corporate entities that have released big failures, right? Microsoft might be a good example of Zune. So we can do some of our testing for our minimum viable product through customer interviews. But the problem is, I can walk up to you right now and ask you, do you want my product? But my product doesn't exist. And you've never even heard of my product before. You don't even know the concept behind it. So you're like, I don't know. I don't know that I feel comfortable being out and listening to music with my, I want to listen to music with my friends. I want all of us to hear it. So without having something to experience, you're going to have a real hard time providing quality feedback, right? And so that's why we create little products for people to play with. That's why we have a minimum viable product. So I can ask a whole bunch of people their theoretical feedback about a theoretical thing but that theoretical answer may not provide me the kind of quality that I want, or that's going to be meaningful for me, or it's going to be accurate. And that's the whole basis of marketing, right? Everything we see on television, every commercial you see on television is something you don't need. That's the whole reason why they're having to market it. It's the whole reason marketing exists. It's to convince you have to buy something you don't want necessarily have to buy, right? We don't have to buy the fingernail polish. We don't have to buy the really awesome athletic shoes or all this other stuff. We're convincing you need to buy that. That's all how marketing works. So you have to do that with a real product. So a number of different tips for doing customer interviews. These seem kind of obvious, but you don't want to, for example, lead the customer through the interview. And you don't necessarily want customers that are going to be really excited for your product and really want to be saying the nice things to you. Best thing I have when I'm coming up with a business idea, my best friends that I talk to first are the ones that are kind of curmudgeons. They're the ones that tell me I'm crazy, right? This is never, it's not never going to work, but you're looking at it all wrong. Have you considered these three things, right? I need critical feedback, and we want that from our customer interviews as well. Someone that's saying, I don't understand, is a very good piece of feedback, right? Or I can do this already. We want that kind of critical feedback as well. And certainly we want to listen. We don't need to be stepping them through every stage of the process or the product or everything else. We want to listen to what their initial perceptions are, and we want to ask them for introductions for more people, right? Are they willing to bring other people in to introduce the product? Are they willing to share it with their friends? Because if they are, that's a real meaningful piece of feedback, right?
What do you mean by politeness training?
Disarm politeness. Oh, I think that's the. I want to encourage you when we're talking to not be super nice to me, to give me the critical feedback, right? So, but there's lots of other ways to measure, and there's ways to account for product and sale and measurement. We really need to build that into our product itself, and we can do it a number of different ways. One of the ways we can do it into the product and process is to do split tests, and I'll talk about that. There's a number of other different testing methodologies. We can do a whole seminar just on testing methodologies, but we'll talk about a little bit of that right now. So one of them is cohort analysis. So a cohort, in the context of what we're going to talk about right now, is a group of people, right? And so if I'm measuring sales week over week over week, and I'm not measuring that group that had that one version of the minimum viable product and how that group has been performing 3 months down the line, I can't really measure how changes to my product have impacted reoccurring sales or customer referrals for that one group. So if I'm making multiple changes, I'm iterating in my MVP, I need to track the groups that were experiencing that one change so I can compare them over others to have a realistic understanding of how those changes have impacted my product, right? Because everything I do when I build this MVP, everything is to increase engagement or increase whatever goal that I'm setting. And we're going to get to different kind of goals for different kind of businesses. But as an example, if I have a great product and I'm doing pretty well, and I have year-over-year sales growth, customer growth of 10%, right? And I release 3 new product features this year, and I put it out, and I continue to have 10% growth. Why have those features? Those features have done nothing to do anything for my bottom line, right? I probably could have kept them out and continued to have that growth, theoretically. And so I want to track, are those features, are the things that I'm adding to the product actually contributing? And if not, why? Understand that, so I can spend that time, those resources, in something else that's actually going to add to my sales, to my growth, or get me some sales, right? I'm just first starting out. So we have cohort analysis. I'm tracking who's signing up. In this case, it's a product, or an online product. Signing up, who's downloading the software, maybe it's a mobile app, who's activating it, and then maybe who's purchasing it. This might be a free app, right? So I'm going to track multiple stages of that customer. So in this case, we see for the full month, we see 9,700 sign-ins, 5,000 or so downloads, step. Right? See that 12% are purchasing over the course of the month. But I've been doing alterations. I've been updating my minimum viable product, my MVP, once a week in this case. So we can see from week 1 to week 2, I made a change, and we see a slight improvement to our signups, which trickles down into a slight improvement totals for our download, and same with activation, and same with purchase. But the percentages are right in line. So whatever change I did, got a few more people to sign up, and that percentage kind of followed all the way through. So I got a few more downloads and so on. Week 3, I had only a little bit more sign up, but if you see where the download and activate starts getting higher and purchase is significantly higher, right? So I did very little to encourage more signups, but whatever I did drew the right kind of customer or convinced the customer in some way to actually make the purchase. So that's a measurable thing. I want to know what I did from week 2 to 3. And again, in week 4, we see I have a little bit more signups, but the purchases went back down to normal. So whatever I'm doing when I'm making those changes to the MVP, I'm tracking that distinct cohort or group so I can identify what those changes are. And I say, well, whatever I did, we need to undo that, right? Clearly, there's something going on here that we need to track. And it might be that I'm doing a better job of marketing and advertising to the right target market, right? I got the same number of signups, but I'm more likely to get someone to pay if they were in the right market to begin with. Who knows what that change was in that cohort. We can also do split tests. So I have my minimum viable product, and so with this minimum viable product, in this case, we'll call it a website. It doesn't always have to be websites, by the way. We can talk about non-website stuff, or I will focus on tech. To randomly, statistically, half the group, I'm going to have layout A. And to the other half of the group, I'm going to have layout B, and I'm going to measure based on just changes to maybe colors of buttons. You can do really specific things. I'm going to measure the impact of one layout versus another. And so again, we can take a look at one of them has fewer signups, but more purchases. So if I'm not tracking the cohort all the way through, because this purchase might actually be a little while later, I might get really jazzed when I put up the new layout, maybe layout A, or I would say rather layout B, and I have more signups, and I think immediately that has more signups. That's clearly the better website, right? That's the better homepage. But if I'm not tracking it all the way through to my cohorts, I'm not seeing that in fact it's much worse. I have better sales and revenue from cohort A because the conversion rate is much higher, and I care about the conversion rate a heck of a lot more than I care about people filling in a form, right? So we need to build this into the product. Now, it's a lot easier with software product. There's lots of tools to be able to measure that sort of thing. There's services. Whole software businesses have been created to do this sort of thing. But you can also do it into your physical goods sales transactions, whatever you need to do. It just have to be a little more creative about how that process works. And so the important part here is we don't want to create the whole product and then figure out afterwards how we're going to measure it. But then we have to start thinking about what we're going to measure, right? That was easy for that one. Right? It was just software downloads and then activations. But there's all kinds of different things to measure. And so we have to be careful not to be focusing on vanity metrics. So millions of downloads don't really matter if we don't have any activations or if the activation rate is low. Or we have incredible growth on our website, but they still don't have any paying customers. Or we can focus, so like we don't want to focus on website hits, for example. That would be a common vanity metric. Or we could talk about month-over-month customer registrations, but it turns out that our return rate is flatlined. And if we have certain growth models for our business, that customer return rate, turns out, is one of the most important metrics to track. So what are useful metrics? There's a few different tacks here. Is it actionable? Is there like a clear cause and effect? Can we know one thing is triggering another that we really care about? Is it accessible? Is it the measurement easy enough to understand that everyone in the organization will accept it? If you have I'm sure we've actually all been here, and if not, we've had a loved one or a friend that's been in the situation where something has gone wrong. The deployment is wrong, the sales aren't there, whatever, and everyone starts pointing fingers, right? And it's the server people's fault because the website went down. Well, they weren't told about the traffic because they didn't know marketing was going to be putting an ad in the Super Bowl, right? So is it really their fault? Right? So you can start pointing all the fingers. But if you have clear measurements and metrics that everyone is shared with all the time, and you can all focus on the same numbers, then it's a lot easier to be focused on how do we solve the problem as a whole team versus only having it internally for one group, right? Or having it in jargon that doesn't make much sense to the rest of the company or organization or group, depending on the size. All right. So when we're thinking about how to measure, we really have to think about what kind of growth engine your company has, because different growth engines will require you to focus on different metrics as far as your end goal. So let's talk about sticky engines at first. An example of that would be an online game, month over month, recurring revenue. World of Warcraft, a great example, right? Or it might be eBay or an auction site, something you're going to continue going to repeatedly. So you're measuring. If you're just measuring the new customers, you're not measuring enough information. You actually really care about customer retention and the return and the churn rate of your existing customers, right? Because you can keep spending dollar after dollar. You probably know exactly how much it costs to get a new customer. You've done enough research to know that it costs $7 per thousand click-through rate or something like that. And so your average customer is going to be $7. So we know that. But if you're going to churn them out the other end, you're just always paying for customers. You're not having any kind of growth. So your customer acquisition has to be far greater than your attrition rate on the back end. Otherwise, you're not going to grow at all. So you're reducing your churn is the key thing you're going to want to measure. On top of course, new customers coming in. It's dealing with churn. A viral engine is going to be measuring something a little bit differently. So a viral engine, it's social networks, it's Tupperware, right? And we're measuring the viral coefficient. And a viral coefficient is how many people they will recommend it to, right? So 1 person in 10 recommends it to someone else. That on the face of it, that doesn't sound too bad, right? So if you're all customers of mine, one of you, in fact, 2 of you out of this group, is going to recommend it to their friends. But that actually isn't viral at all. That's not a sustainable loop. So you need 1 person brings in more than 1 customer in order for the viral part to kick in. And the reason why we need viral, like social networks or Tupperware or something like that, is it's too expensive to acquire them directly. In other words, Facebook is not going to advertise and pay $4 per customer to try to get people to join Facebook. Their engine doesn't work that way, their growth engine. They go through the viral step instead. So here's an example, and you can see the coefficients here on the side. So 0.09 is basically flatline, right? Red, 1, again, flatline. So that's 1 person recommending 1 new customer. So 1.1, so just a little bit more than 1 new customer per average current customer. And you see the orange, so you start to growth. And 1.2, not a whole lot more. So on average, 1 customer is recommending 1.2 new customers to your product, and there you have the growth curve that you're really looking for. And so that's how important that coefficient is, and so that's what you're really trying to drive for that viral system. So if your kind of business is going to be focused on growth engines that are viral in nature, you're going to be focused on that. So what are a couple examples of kicking that into gear? The good ones, Hotmail, didn't do so well at first. And then they added, P.S. get your free Hotmail at the bottom of every single email that went out of Hotmail. And just that alone triggered 1 million new customers in the first 6 months. And 5 weeks later, it was 2 million. So they kind of went slow. And then bam, they add that growth. And then they exit out for $400 million to Microsoft. And so it was that enabler in that email for the viral growth to happen of get your free email. So we also have paid engines. So for some reason I didn't put any examples here. I'm trying to remember what examples I had for this. Oh, so that's if we're literally paying for the customer itself. We were giving that as an example of versus viral before. So we know what the customer acquisition cost is going to be. So obviously the value, we have to measure the value lifetime of that customer, like how long that customer is going to be with us and how much value they're going to provide over the lifetime. We got a little cutoff here. So we just have to know that the lifetime is going to exceed the acquisition cost. And acquisition cost is going to be more than just the actual payment for the advertising. It's going to be your outbound sales and retail locations or other things. So basically it's a pretty easy measurement, but we still have to track that too. Which, when we know the value the lifetime value of a customer, means we have to track again that customer all the way through. We can't just have the minimum amount of tracking where we're just tracking the sales up front. right? We have to be able to track that customer completely throughout the entire existence of our product. So we know what that value of the lifetime of the customer is. So we know how much we're able to invest in order to acquire those customers. And if one's greater than the other, you just keep plowing money in, and you get more of a return every time. Okay, so tuning your feedback loop. So if we're thinking about month-over-month growth, 8% versus 10%, which one's better? Right, if I said, I have a new startup, I've been going 6 months, currently my growth is 8%, and Doug says my growth is at 10%, we're probably going to think Doug's in a lot better position, right? Because we're just taking a current stat number from right now. Versus measuring, again, over time, changes. So if we take a look at the compounding growth rate for company A, my company and Doug's company, 6 months ago, I had virtually no growth. And Doug was almost 10. But I'm doing a lot of iterations in my MVP, right? I'm really measuring, and I'm trying very hard. And so every month, I'm doing a little bit better, changing to 2, 3%, almost 5%, 6%, now I'm at 8. And Doug has barely moved the needle from 9.8% to 10%. So Doug's still doing better than me, but we can see the trend clearly. And we can see what's going to be going on another 6 months after this is done. Right? So again, we're tracking changes over time, has multiple returns, not just for iterating the product, but also for understanding the growth curve moving forward. So burn rate, probably don't have to spend much time on this. The concept of an MVP is we want to iterate often. So your burn rate, your runway, is your cash on hand divided by your burn rate. So we know what our burn rate is. That's how much money we're spending every month. And so how many iterations is our runway divided by the speed of each iteration, right? So if it takes you 2 months to modify your minimum viable product, and you only have 6 months worth of cash, you got 3 chances, right? If you're able to iterate every couple weeks, you have a lot more chances at bat. And I think that's better odds. Yeah.
You know, a lot of this has been particularly about code. You know, your first loop slide, one of the circles was code. Can you comment specifically with the burn rate on how, or what you've seen, how folks have applied the MVP concept to, I'll say, input-intensive products or services?
Like an actual hard good type of
something to that effect,
so,
where, you know,
sure,
an iteration is not just, let's, you know, crank out some new code over a week.
Yeah, so it's a little bit harder with products because of the fact that, you know, I've developed products that are $500,000 to a couple $1 million. Sometimes you get in the trap of is marketing will say, well, we need all these features on that product. Or you need to have 4 or 5 different versions, or I need to have different colors. This is a specific example where I wanted to create one product and I ended up being kind of forced to create 6, not knowing that this one product was going to actually work. And these other 5 might have been just total waste of time. So you can do it in hard, good, you know, products, and the key thing is focusing on the right set of features, not trying to do everything, engaging potential customers up front and asking, getting them involved and stuff, and kind of holding them off, because a lot of times, and I'll talk about it, they're going to want everything typically. So you can do it. You can do it also without, nowadays with 3D printing and stuff, you can do, you know, we used to call it SLAs and, you know, stereolithographic, but it would cost me $600 to like have someone design this and then print this up. You know, now it's like $100 or $50 and you can have it tomorrow. So that type of stuff you can do, and you can iterate and just use that for prototyping. So.
Thanks, Doug. I think also you could do it, like, if we think about restaurants, right? We'd be measuring the impact of menu changes, even slight changes, right? If you talk about, even in hard goods, your product doesn't have to physically function for your first minimum viable product, right? So if I have a basic thing where the expectation is you hit the start button and then you engage this and it creates a call, or, you know, whatever the thing is, you can actually fake most of it on the inside to see if people are willing to engage with it. And then once they see it, you get that customer interview, right, where they can have a better understanding of whether they drive value or not. So if it's a physical good, you can mock things up pretty cheaply on a small scale to engage customer interviews and that sort of thing. It just happens to be really easy to talk about it in the code world, which happens to be also where I tend to live, right? Right. But so here's one of the examples in the Lean Startup book. How many people have read the book, by the way? Hey, Tom. So one of the examples in the book is actually, I want to follow up with this and see if it actually proved that the model was actually compelling. But they had an idea. This chef had an idea for a website that would take your feedback about the kind of foods you like and your dietary requirements and where you live with all the restaurant or with the is it Safeway nearby or is it Trader Joe's or whatever, all kinds of inputs, and would create amazing menus for you and recipes, right? And so instead of going through and building that whole thing, they just did it manually. They found 5 customers or whatever it was, and they came to the house every week and did interviews and recorded data and went through the exact same thing, but they did it manually until they understood what the process really was, because they didn't understand, they weren't able to understand how their software was supposed to work. They thought there was just way too many question marks in there. So they had to do it manually first. And so that's completely acceptable. You have to have something to test, but that could be just write stuff on a piece of paper and pencil. So the point for the burn rate here is, and the number of iterations is just why it's so important to be able to measure quickly and be able to make updates and get that back in the customer's hands. Because if you do have either it's your own capital, right, or your friends and family plan of money, or you've gotten investment, you have a limited amount of chances. And so, of course, when is it time to pivot? Pivoting is when you realize this isn't going to work out. Right? Whatever my hypothesis is, I was clearly wrong. I probably learned a lot during that, though, and by learning that, hopefully I'm able to make that, turn this into a new company of some kind. So you can zoom in and focus on one feature. Instagram is a good example of that. You can change vertical markets. If you realize that whatever vertical you're focusing on is your customers are just going to be too hard or they're too price sensitive or who knows what it is. Or just go for a new product entirely. And of course, you want to get to this point before you've run out of money, right? And so a lot of the big hot companies out there right now, Twitter, Groupon, Draw Something, Instagram, they were all major pivots. They didn't do the thing that they set out to do. They realized that there was a bigger market, or that there wasn't the engagement with their current product, or with Instagram's example, it had a whole social networking thing. They just focused on the one thing that people really liked in their product, and just that focus alone was actually pretty compelling. So you can find me at AlphaLoft. You can find out more information about the scene of technology here at Seacoast.io. It's actually a map of all the tech companies, startups, creative service firms. UNH is listed. And it's also an events board. If you like these sort of events, this event is listed, and all of the series should be listed and will be listed. But so is the events going on in Portsmouth and Exeter and all over the Seacoast. And it's an aggregation, actually. I could bring it up real quick if you want to show it. And then we'll switch over to Doug's. And then you feel free to email me or contact me. I have my card here, too. Any questions about that while we're switching over? Doug's going to bring up the Seacoast.io site just so you can get an idea what that is. Any questions? All right, so I did all the theory. Doug's actually going to talk about the reality and the hard lessons learned from his project. So kind of a narrow, where's the map? There it is. So basically in the narrower resolution, the map pops below it. So we can zoom in on Portsmouth if you want, and we can see all the dots, and we can click on a dot. We see there's a lot of dots, and not in Newburyport. There we go. Up in Portsmouth, and click on one, and we can see what that organization is. But if we go up to, scroll back up to the top, up more, there we go, in the dash line. It thinks you're in mobile view because the resolution is so low. And click on events. There's also a job board if you have jobs, if you got a company you're hiring. So these are all the events you can see just in the next few days. There's several events going on. There's lots of stuff going on the Seacoast for tech, startup, and anything else. And then if you want anything listed, jump on there and add it or let me know. Thank you very much. I thought Doug's first slide was don't do it. Yeah.
So I learned about Lean Startup through Josh, actually, a couple years ago. And early in my career, I worked for General Electric, and I was heavily involved in lean manufacturing. So there's a lot of principles from lean manufacturing that have bled over into Lean Startup, which was good. And I'm a process guy and an engineer and all that kind of stuff. So so I've been in operations most of my life, either in manufacturing or in the agency world. So a couple years ago, I had this crazy idea. I was consulting companies and trying to help them operate better. And I said, I really need a framework to help them, because once I leave, things kind of like just go back to normal or abnormal. And so I created FrostHub based out of that. And so we're really trying to work with professional services firms, and I'll talk a little bit about how we are meandering through this process, to help them figure out how to operate better, how to orchestrate their teams better, how to reduce their coordination costs. So I've got a lot of experience in this, and it's a painful process for companies to go through. So we're hoping with this framework that it'll help out. So it's, the lessons learned is after going through this. So I'm part of the Lean Startup Challenge in Boston right now. I did it last year also. It educates you, but also kind of helps you go through the process, because it's a tough process to go through when you're trying to do something. Because even when we talk about minimum viable product, you have a tendency to kind of want to fall back and build everything all at once. And if you got tons and tons of money, maybe that's a okay thing, but odds are you're going to fail. So we're self-funded, myself, and then there's 7 or 8 of us that are working together. Most of the people are part-time. So we don't have tons of cash to throw at the product, and we have to really think and focus on what we want to do. So it is kind of difficult to figure out what your minimum viable product is going to be. And so I'll show you some examples. We have definitely built functionality that sucks, that is not being used, that we thought was a great idea and everyone doesn't. So, you got to get used to that kind of feedback. And I would say, what Josh was referring to, I would beg them to tell me something bad. Because, you start talking to people that right? And they're not going to tell you the truth. They're like, this doesn't really, make that much sense, or this is really bad or whatever. And I've had people go, well, we didn't want to hurt your feelings. I'm like, I've been developing products for a long time. I'm thick-skinned. Please do it, otherwise I'm going to waste money. And I'm not going to give you what you need down the road. And the other thing is our build, measure, learn cycle was extremely long in the beginning. So, and plus we were trying to build up our team. So we had myself, a couple UI user interface designers, and we didn't have our development team in place yet. So we could kind of go and go and go until our team, we rationalized that until our team got on board, and we really shouldn't have done that. So we're really learning to shorten our build, measure, learn cycle to instead of months into less than 3 weeks now. So it's taken some time to get through that. Lessons learned also is test with people that you didn't know before. Again, this is the get outside of the area. So we started actually targeting companies in New York City and Chicago through LinkedIn and just said, hey, this is our target audience. And it was general managers and team leaders of professional services firms, and we just went through and connected with them. So, hey, we got a startup, really simple thing. We have a startup, we have an idea, we think we can help you. Do you have 15 minutes to chat with us? And out of, I think we sent out about personal invites 50 or 60, and and this is the other thing, is you try and do things on the cheap. So in order for them to kind of respond to you, they got to connect with you. So you're actually connecting with somebody you don't even know, and we got about a 60% response. 60% of the people actually connected with me that I didn't know. So those are how conversations actually got started. And finding the right early adopters. So you think that you'll have an early adopter, but then the reality is they're not. And you have to keep searching and talking to people and trying to really get the person who is willing to not have all the features. Because a lot of people will just say, well, I think it should have this, I think it should have that, and I'm not going to use the product really until it has those features. And maybe they're not actually the right target that we should be talking to, too. So it gives you a lot of idea is to venture out even farther. And in the lean startup world, they call it get out of the building. And probably 50 to 60% of my time now is out of the building. These guys haven't seen me in a week, because we've just been kind of out there and talking and having conversations. And the other goal is of the conversations that you're having is to make sure that you're continuing to have a conversation. So some of our tests are actually, is this person willing to talk to us again? And if they are, then that was actually a success because they see that we're on to something. And we try to tell them, don't BS us. So you don't want to build this. And this is the Homer Mobile. Does anyone know the story behind the Homer Mobile? So Homer, his brother hired him and said, I want you to build the vehicle for the average man, because Homer was the average man, and we know he's not average. And so he ends up building something with all these features and bells and whistles that he wanted, and then drove his brother's company into the ground. But Homer got this really cool vehicle. So don't do this. So here's an example of a minimum viable product. So this is a spreadsheet. And basically, we're trying to help with process management. So we laid out like a process. Discover phase, define, this kind of goes down. And we tested this with people and said, is this kind of your process to begin with? Do you guys think in this way? To have this, would this even be helpful? So we started with a spreadsheet, which turned into my lovely sketch here, which is a bunch of phases and a bunch of names and some start states and things that haven't been scheduled. And we started having conversation around this. This was more of an internal conversation. So, that was kind of like the first design. And then we moved into this. So my designer and I kind of went back. We kind of did methods. And the whole time that every iteration we did here, we had at least a dozen conversations with people that we knew that worked in the industry that, would this be of value? Is this visual enough? Because we're really trying to develop a nice visual tool. So black and white, not pretty, and we got really good feedback on this. So this was Rev 1. We went into Rev 2, which was, hey, we added a little bit of color. We needed a little bit more space because things are going to kind of go offline, go off the screen because people, some of the feedback was, my company, we have 7 phases. And other companies are like, well, we're only operating 2. So we're kind of trying to figure out to accommodate for some folks. And then this is where we derailed ourselves, and we went into this really beautiful thing. And I remember showing this to Josh, and he said, "That's overwhelming." So we knew immediately that we kept showing it to people, and it was like, it's a lot of information. I'm not exactly sure what's going on there. So and we probably went through a few. This isn't really Rev 1. This was probably like Rev 4 of this. So we wasted time there. And then we drilled down and said, all right, let's keep it more basic. So we took out, some color. We added some color to it. We cleaned up the design a little bit. And we got some good reaction to this. And we tested certain things on this. We had conversations about, is it important for you to understand the progress of it? And I don't want to get in detail on methods, but this is a method within a phase. So, for instance, it might be, let's say, user research, for instance. Is a budget important? Is it important to be able to assign people to it? What's important? And this was a conversation thing before we actually built it. And this is what we actually built. This is a screenshot from yesterday. Me and one of my developers were on the phone, and we built this. So a phase to a couple methods, and they can kind of rearrange them. And we're just going to test this over the next week or two with customers. So we went from this to that, more detail, a little fancier color and stuff like that, to this, which was a big waste, to a little less, and then this is actually what we built. So we went through this process without actually spending money on development time. And now we also have a very clear understanding of, we don't have so many features in here that we can't test everything, because you're not going to understand where the whole cause and effect is. And then if we get some feedback on this, then maybe we're going to figure out, do we add progress bar? What do we add? Only one feature, and then test on that again. Any questions, thoughts? So we're going to test with 10 more companies. We're going to measure the value. So it's really important to understand about what the value is of what you're adding. And you have to ask probably 5 different questions in order to understand that too when you're talking to folks. We're probably going to tweak the existing a little bit and maybe add another feature, and then try to do this within 1 to 2 week cycles so that we're iterating as fast as we can. So there's some great tools out there. So we're part of the Lean Startup Challenge. It's in Boston. It's like 40 companies are doing it, and they're going through. We're at the kind of the mid-level of a startup where a lot of companies are very early with just ideas. There's some companies that actually launch products. We haven't launched our product yet. Well, we've launched it to about 10 companies to get feedback and stuff, but we're not selling it right now. And a lot of it is to figure out at what point is it really sellable. So we've been focusing a lot, and I was talking to Mark about this, so we've been focusing a lot on professional services interactive agencies. And even though I ran an agency, I'm probably an anomaly as far as the process. I'm very process oriented. And if you know creative folks, is there any designers in here? Are you process oriented? Don't ask you to do that, right? If I showed it, I did tests years ago when I would go to one of my designers, and I would show them a Gantt chart for the project plan, and their eyes just roll back in their head, right? So you got to know your target and who you're talking to. So we're talking very specifically to general managers and stuff, and trying to have people who are like designers and people who are going to be putting some information into the system, have minimal impact or more input into the system. So here's some good tools. Lean Launch Lab. There's a little thing over there it's a sheet that we use that we test hypotheses, because you got to test your problem hypothesis, your customer hypothesis, your solution hypothesis, and you kind of keep going back and forth as you move down. We haven't necessarily pivoted yet, but we are looking at our customer hypothesis, like interactive agencies and stuff, and this might not be quite the fit for it versus for instance, architectural and engineering companies, or even today we had a conversation with an investment bank. That never would have occurred to me 3 weeks ago. So, they're very much focused on process. They have lots of regulations. They have to orchestrate big teams. So it's interesting opportunity. They're not probably as price sensitive, so maybe that allows us a little bit more margin too. So here's a couple resources. And that is it. Yes.
I guess after this talk, I want to visit some of these places, and you said, in particular, I'm curious about the Boston startup, whatever you said it was, and can we find these kinds of things by going to that site? What is that Boston startup thing, and might we want to join it for our startup? Do you have any other comments on that?
Yeah, so it's the Boston Lean Startup Challenge. They hold it once a year. And there's more of a ecosystem down in Boston when it comes to startups and lean startups and stuff. So there's groups down there that actually meet on a monthly basis. You can just search on Lean Startup, and you're in Boston, and you're going to get all kinds of resources. The Lean Startup book by Eric Ries is very good. I'm going to his conference in San Francisco in December. One of my teammates went to it last year and was able to learn a lot. So I'm going this year, and because we're a startup, we actually got a scholarship to it. It only cost us $300 instead of like $2,500.
Is a note about take the mic so we can catch up there. In regards to the conference, the last 2 years in a row that they've done that conference, they've allowed places to live stream it for free. And so AlphaLoft has actually just shown the entire conference for free. People just bring their food and snacks and hang out and watch a whole conference. And so, Mark, maybe I can get with you and we can talk about trying to coordinate a live viewing here or something like that. Tom, did you have a comment about that? Okay, so at any rate, it's a possibility that we'll have some sort of live viewing of that conference as well. And I found some really great insights from a number of different companies talking about their approach to lean startup. And perhaps it's a physical good versus a software company versus a service-oriented company and so on.
Yeah, there's a lot of you can find a lot of good examples, and you'd be surprised how minimal a viable product you can create. One was a guy that wanted to lease scooters, and I met him a couple of years ago, and he wanted to lease scooters, and so he bought like 5 scooters. He put it in a college town, and he failed miserably. One, because he didn't test anything. 2 was kids really wanted to drive Vespas instead of Chinese-made scooters. So he didn't pivot. He just basically went back and he created a page on Craigslist and said, "Hey, are you willing to? Does anyone want to rent my Vespa?" He didn't even own a Vespa. And then you see what his responses were. So it's kind of like, I wouldn't say it's shady sometimes, but you can kind of do a little smoke and mirrors when you're doing your, landing pages are very important. We've gone through 3 landing pages where we've tried to figure out who's going to basically sign up for a product that doesn't exist yet. Who's going to be, we haven't tested as far as what the cost is going to be because we're more of an enterprise and we're trying to, it's not necessarily an individual consumer product. So it's getting more and more. The ecosystem is building like it did 25 years ago with lean manufacturing or 30 years ago. Now lean startup is it's kind of all over the place.
I should say the Lean Startup Circle in Boston routinely has 120 people.
And I think they have 2,000 members too. And it's at the Nerd Center. I think there's one event tomorrow night at the Nerd Center in Boston.
A question about product validation.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, what we talked about tonight is testing kind of in person, right? Showing somebody a prototype or an MVP. But even before that, as you're trying to kind of look at the market as a whole, rarely is somebody first to market on something, right?
Correct.
Right? Rarely you are the first ID, or your patient zero or whatever. When that's the case, at what point can you tell that the market is too crowded and this is just not something to compete on?
Yeah.
Or whether there's still some weaknesses in space there to move in.
Yeah, we're in that mental mode right now where a lot of people want to put us into the project management software realm, right? And there's literally hundreds of products out there. And there's a couple products out there that are very close to what we're actually doing that are newer products because it's about data visualization and stuff. So you can use their product actually as a benchmark to see how people are reacting to it, like on blogs or something of that nature, and see if there's any holes that maybe you're going down that there might not go down. But you really don't know until you test. You definitely have to differentiate yourself. You have to offer more value than they're offering. And what is that? And that's where we're focusing on, where we're taking data and charting it out in nice graphical manner and being able to provide that type of stuff. But also the fact that a couple of our competitors are very much targeted to interactive agencies. Maybe we want to steer away from that too. And it is a big challenge. So that's why your customer hypothesis, your problem hypothesis is very, you got to keep testing it.
And I think you can also, focus on niche, right? So there could be a huge player that's doing well, just generally, but they could be ignoring a significant niche market that you could sell right into that have been underserved for so long, right? What a lot of companies have done, which is very interesting to me, is they've used systems like Kickstarter as part of their MVP testing, and so and we talk about oversaturation. You got card games. There's tons. There's just a numerous. But you have a game like Cards Against Humanity, which is actually very similar to other existing card game that they pre-sold on Kickstarter and made enormous amounts of money and have continued to make more. So you can pre-sell. Depending on the rules for Kickstarter, depending on what kind of product you have to pre-sell, sometimes you have to have more produced than others. And other example is have you seen the power strip that's bends and snakes, right? How many power strips can you buy at Home Depot right now? Who needs to make another power strip, right? But there's room for innovation still. I think if you're identifying a problem that's still not being solved, and the trick, there's so many tricks that have to be had, but the trick is getting out in the market and again educating someone who doesn't really need another power strip that they need to buy your thing. That's what Apple does so well, right?
you have to be careful of, hey, that's cool. Because people will tell you that until you're blue. Oh, that's a cool feature. We thought it was a cool feature too, and that's why we built it. And then you find out that it takes too much time to use it, or it gets ignored, or maybe that isn't really where the value is until we connect the little other pieces of the puzzle to it. So it's iterating to the point where, you know, at some point, you know, are we providing that value? You know, do we just keep incrementally increasing until the conversation is like, yeah, that's kind of what I want. But you really got to focus. You're going to build too much. I guarantee it. Whatever you're going to do, you're going to build twice as much than you really need. And, you know, then you start having conversations with your team, which I had yesterday, which I said, we're stripping this functionality right out. Well, we already built it. No one's using it, you know, so why keep it? And, you know, because it's only going to distract them and maybe actually make the product a little bit more confusing.
I was wondering where setting a price point comes in. Is that part of the MVP process, or is that later?
That's totally part of the MVP process. Depends on when you can do it. We kind of looked at it and had conversations with companies saying, what are you willing to pay for software, period? Not even just my software. Like, what's digestible? 10,000 a year, 20, 50? And if you're a 50-person company, 50 grand a year is a lot of money to spend on software. So no. So you kind of like can figure out like where the zone is. So even, and I blame Steve Jobs and Apple Store for this, I think, because of the fact that, you know, all these companies who are trying to sell apps now, you know, if it's more than $5, people are like, oh, you know, so the bar was set so low. We're kind of in the enterprise market where, you know, 5 or 10 grand a year is probably not going to be a big deal. It would, you know, but that difference between 5 to 10 grand might be our survival, you know, so you're just going to have to do it. Kissmetrics is an analytics product out there that's really good, and they do a lot of webinars on pricing, even though they're not about pricing, but they talk about how they price things, and I learned a lot from them. So they basically every year they keep increasing their price. HubSpot does this too. They keep increasing their price and kind of see what happens. And everyone's like, oh my God, everyone's going to leave, but no one does. So as long as they keep providing better value.
I just want to add to that as well that's a key part of your testing for your product, obviously, as well. When you're doing split testing, you may feel uncomfortable with charging one group more money than another, but it's really important for you to identify price sensitivity for groups and so on, because that can help you figure out how to make packages later on, right? You know, it's the whole reason why airline flights cost a different amount of money for everybody, right? And why when you sign up for XYZ website, we have package A, B, and C. This is because depending on your price sensitivity, you're going to choose one, but they want to maximize their dollar. And so there's an enormous number of great websites and books just focused purely on the science of pricing, right? Setting the foundation of the price. You establish the high price first, and it's a lot easier to go to $40 from $50 than to start at 20 and get them up to 40, and all kinds of really classic psychological stuff that you can all test within your MVP.
Yeah, a lot of people say you can ask your customer what you want, but then double it. Because they're not going to tell you really what they want to pay. I mean, if someone told me what I wanted to pay for a vehicle, I'd be, 12 grand, you know, but the reality is that's not.
Just out of curiosity, is FrostHub going to be a license that you're selling, or is it the actual files they would download and put on their own server?
It's going to be, right now the plan is to be a license, potentially an annual or a monthly license, but we'll see how that goes. It's really going to depend on, I mean, if we're going down the path that we're going down now, everyone's kind of in the monthly SaaS subscription model. And there's a lot of theories about how that's not very good because it actually hurts your churn rate because you're not kind of locking folks in. Because some of the software that's out there takes a few months to really get the value of, you know, versus, you know, a checklist software or something, you know.
So,
Thank you.
So So I hope that we can continue more questions over food and beverage, but I hear that the ice is melting. So with that, we really want to say thank you so much to Doug and to Josh for kicking us off this season. That was fantastic. And please continue with your questions. Thanks, everybody.